What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and it's time for patch 11.18 for League of Legends. This is, as you'll see if you read the context they gave, one of two, like, objectively, obviously, worlds-focused patches. The goal being that, look, not all these changes are going to be great for solo queue. That said, there are some solo queue-focused changes in this patch, but largely it is like, hey, sometimes they're going to buff champions that are balanced or nerf champions that are weak in solo queue because they want to shake up the pro meta. In general, by the way, when Riot buffs or nerfs things for pro specifically, they almost never want to delete the champion from pro play. Almost never. I think it's happened once in a while, but generally not what's going on. So for example, the changes to Rumble, back when Rumble was like a top 3 jungler during MSI, according to pros, and Riot nerfed the W cooldown, they wanted his presence to go from like 80% to 30% or to 50 or something like that, right? Like they want some sort of moderate cut down from like, okay, well, he's an S tier champion to he's a viable champion. And anytime it goes to 0 instead, they'll often look back and say, well, okay, can we soften the blow? Now they probably could have done the Rumble changes sooner, for example, but that's kind of what's going on here. One final thing to point out, doing these rundowns, and any sort of follow-on content, I tend to get about one or two things wrong, just human error-wise. So, for example, with the Sona changes from a couple patches ago, I mistakenly wrote down her ultimate CD as 10-25-60 and not 10-25-40. And so there was, some, pretty huge like numbers errors for rank 3 of the ultimate. This just tends to happen once in a while. In this one in particular, by the way, I did my comparison. So basically, normally I get the patch notes early, and so I look stuff up, and I write down the old numbers, then I do the new numbers, and then off we go. In this case, I did it off of the current patch notes. You can see it's, well, this was posted 3 hours ago. You can see down there. Which also meant that any website I did to like look up what current champion stats are, that was also already updated. So there's a chance, even though I did my best to correct for that, be like, oh, no, this is the new AD, not the old AD. So if we're going to subtract 2, it's, so there's a chance it's some human error. Anyway, let's get into the patch itself. It is, again, pro-focused. This is going to be, by the way, the spicier of the two patches. You can see there's a lot of changes here. This is going to be the spicier of the two. The idea being that if something gets really broken and is way too good somewhere or way too bad somewhere, they can use 11.19 to fix it. And in general, 11.19 has more sort of conservative, lower risk changes. So there's a bunch of champions. Of note, Talon is not listed here as a nerf. Because it's down here. Talon mid, by the way, is very OP, and let's actually get into the patch itself. Okay, so Aphelios is one of the strongly performing bot laners right now. People play around him a lot, so okay, -2 AD, great, good meme. And because his Q passive is still what I believe you max first, which is the base AD, that's 5 per rank, so his base AD actually goes from 57 to 62, 55 becomes 60, off we go. Moderate nerf to Aphelios, okay, great, 2 AD means a bit. It's a small nerf. He seems to be okay in solo queue. People are doing the lethality second collector build, which seems to be pretty good as well. One thing that's kind of interesting to note is I have seen people do math on like Lord Dominix versus Collector on AD carries, and really, really obviously Lord Dominix, for the math they're doing, seems to be a far better item. In terms of completed item versus completed item, Lord Dominix seems to be clearly better in almost all cases. What's interesting, though, is every time I look at data for win rates and I look at Lord Dominix versus Collector, it's like really, really, really Collector favored. And you might say, well, wait, Phreak. Of course people buy Collector when they're winning, and they buy Lord Dominix when they're losing. So, you've got this huge factor here where you're just measuring people who are ahead. And that's not even apparently true. Like, it may be true a little bit, but not to the degree the win rate is different. So, the main website I use for this is lollytics.com. And one thing that it does, and to be fair, it rounds, so it's not perfect, but it says, okay, well, Aphelios bought 17,400 collectors in this patch, where he built it second, and he tends to finish that item at 20 minutes. So the average collector second for Aphelios is at 20 minutes. The average Lord Dominix for Aphelios second is also at 20 minutes. So if one Aphelios is snowballing and the other Aphelios is getting behind, there's no way they're ending at the same time, right? They're being bought within about 60 seconds, 59 seconds of each other. Now, it still might be that Aphelios is finishing, Collector at 20:01 and Lord Dominic's at 20:59, and hey, that is different, and that can measure some of your win rate difference, and like that may well be true. Again, they're rounding. I can't tell you for sure, but the win rate difference here is so absurd. It's like plus or minus 4 or 5%, that there's something going on that isn't making sense to, because it, like, mathematically correct builds aren't just like lower win rate. I'll go back to a different example, which is way back when we were in an on-hit AD carry meta. Everyone was watching Blade of the Ruin King first, but Data said you should actually go for Ginsu's Rageblade as the first item, like back in the day with old Rageblade where it stacked attack speed per auto attack. And so public data said, no, you should actually go Rageblade. It's a better item. And even though theoretically it's like, well, yeah, if you're ahead, you don't need lifesteal, but it's fine. But ultimately, all the pros realized eventually, because I talked to them about it a little bit, and then eventually they all glommed over, like, oh, yeah, we should just go Rageblade every game. And then everyone just switched, right? And then the win rate difference stayed the same, basically. So from what I can tell, I mean, there are examples of the opposite where it really is true. Things like Magi's, where it's like, well, yeah, you buy Magi's when you're ahead. And sometimes you get really obvious examples as well, like getting a death cap earlier than you would finish, with Zonia's or a Void Staff. It's like, oh, okay, they're really ahead. But anytime the items are within, the same minute of each other and the win rates are 4 or 5% apart, it appears to be that the build's just better. So Collector has a way better build path, first of all. Serrated Dirk is an outstanding item spike. That matters, right? Whereas, by compared to Lord Dominic's, none of the item spikes matter at all. And so, having a spike at 1,000 gold and then that kind of being cleaner, like that matters. The completed item coming online right at 2 items and, looking at actually squishy champion, like when you're fighting Ashe or a Soraka or something, like initially at that time, that's also going to be better than a Lord Dominic's against those targets. No, it's not against all targets, but against those targets. Then also, I think one thing that's probably being undercounted here is the execute matters. The execute is, in a world where you can magically always deal 1 damage every second to all champions all the time in a team fight, this is a 5% damage amp to your entire team. It's actually more like 5.05%, but we're rounding here. And turns out, like, doing a bit more damage yourself versus a 5% damage amp to your entire team is really, really relevant, as well as always ensuring that that gold goes to you for the last hit, which is also really relevant because Aphelios scales with gold better than almost any other champion on his team and almost any game he plays in. And so I think that's one of the weird incomparables that you can't really like drag out and look at. This is all to say that we're talking about Aphelios, that Collector second, as far as I can tell, even through all the biases you can think of, is still the better build than Lord Dominic's. In every single champion I have looked at, Lord Dominic second is not correct. If you're trying to optimize tank DPS, you should go for a Phantom Dancer. And really the choice is between Phantom Dancer and Lord Dominic's, or sorry, Phantom Dancer and Collector, or like a Hurricane or something. And that's where your choices actually lie. So that's what data seems to say. So hey, by the way, Collector Aphelios seems to still be a very good build, and there you go. Aphelios is still a good champion. All right, so next up, Ashe is getting a 4-second cooldown increase on rank 1 of the W. I'm actually not a huge fan of doing an early game nerf onto Ashe. Obviously, she's pretty frustrating to lane against, but Ashe has had pretty much the highest bot lane win rate among marksmen for, I want to say, like 6 months. And okay, she is now like a top 4 AD carry in pro, and maybe she really has started to bubble up towards, closer to number 1, but I don't think she's there just yet. Like Varus is clearly above her, for example. And I think it's correct that they should nerf Ashe, by the way, right? Because again, she's probably going to be the number 1 pro AD carry if they don't nerf her as well. But I think her nerf should have been solo queue focused, which means you tend to want to nerf the late game of this champion. Now, nerfing rank 5 of W is not a late game nerf or anything, but, if you're to look at her attack speed per level or AD per level, something like that, and say, well, we're going to lower her power overall. We're going to make it really, you really do pick her to not be the late game carry. She's really going to be worst in class at this because she has a global stun. Like that to me feels reasonable, and they probably could have gone that way. As I said, not a big deal, but it does mean that Ashe is going to keep having this pro versus solo queue sort of difference, and maybe to be a little bit fair, Ashe sort of deserves to be a little bit inflated in solo queue because people don't tend to get enough crowd control, and so CC champions will tend to be higher in rate in solo queue. And that can be reasonable. I think that can be fine to be like, well, actually, this is just what's going on here. This is allowed because, well, a lot of comps just need Ashe. And if you just nerf all the CC champions, you start to make CC not good because you're giving up too much. And it's like, well, actually, running any CC at all and no CC is the same win rate, so meh. Not saying it's really true, but anyway, here's the cooldown difference. I mean, quite meaningful for a while. Again, at level 9, it equals out, but because the amount of CD gained per rank is so high, even rank 4 is like a really meaningful cooldown change, which is not normally pretty true. But yeah, 14 becoming 18 is a really big deal for cooldown. So yeah, pretty big nerf. Next up is Camille getting another early game focus nerf. Also, a generally strong performer. Camille is quite good for solo queue. Certainly in the pro meta, absolutely. From what I can see, Camille's pro pick rate is not giga busted, but again, she's like a top 4 top laner, so it's kind of just Riot saying, well, let's just take like the top few from each role and go for it. But yeah, so 4, 2, and 0 seconds into her passive cooldown, that's going to be felt for quite a long time. I mean, a 4-second cooldown, longer for the first 6 levels, like that's going to be felt. That's going to affect trading patterns. You can definitely bully her quite a bit more. I think especially in pro player, people can kind of use those cooldowns a bit better. That should be pretty good. Next up, we have Draven. Now, this one I think is really, really interesting. And people looking at it, and what's nice is people, I think, have generally been positive about it, and I agree. But I think this possibly looks better than it really is. Okay, so the adoration stacks are in all chat. Okay, great. But hey, by the way, his R is now an execute based on adoration stacks. Now that is a really big deal, maybe. So here's the thing though. It does literally 0 damage until it executes, and then it does 0 damage because it's, taken up all the adoration stacks. That said, so it's the chance to do 200 true damage once on your ultimate. Now, that doesn't have to be a bad thing. We just talked a little bit before about Collector being really, really good and making a lot of sense in Aphelios because you make sure that you get the kills. And to be fair, Draven guaranteeing that he gets to cash in is a big deal. The fact that the execute isn't going to get dragged down by passing through champions or anything like that or whatever. I don't remember if it actually has damage drop off anymore. It might not actually. Because it turns around on champion anyway, so it probably doesn't have damage drop off. But I mean, regardless, yeah, the point kind of still stands that like so much of the mechanics are good for Draven, right? Because it's an execute, because it cashes an adoration, and because it's true damage, which is really valuable. Like that is all really, really good. But also, it is not the same thing as just like Draven's ultimate now does 100 bonus true damage because it doesn't, right? It does the damage once. And only through an execute range, and then even then, it only matters if they weren't gonna die to it anyway. So there's a lot of if statements that say, hey, it's not as good as you might think. That said, I'm pretty sure this is still a pretty good buff. And Draven appears to be quite good in solo queue, so Draven will continue to be quite good in solo queue. This does seem pro-focus, as they're saying, because pro is a lot fewer kills. You're not often seeing a level 3 kill in lane or level 1 kill in lane. That definitely happens in solo queue. So in pro, he's going to have more passive stacks than in solo queue in general. And so that means the R power is going to be higher in solo queue, or sorry, higher in pro than in solo queue. And so theoretically, yeah, that might actually do a little bit to fix the pro solo queue skew, and that seems pretty good. Next up, Mundo. I didn't do math in this one because the math is pretty flat anyway. Basically, instead of healing, it just grants it as bonus HP. And the numbers against it at 20%, it's 15, 20, 25. She's buffed at rank 1. It's neutral at rank 2, but nerfed in terms of the healing going down. And then, better, well, yeah, better instantly, but sort of worse over time. Now that said, and again, this actually I could have been doing math in this one, but I didn't. Because it grants missing HP as bonus HP, that means this heal feeds into it. So I realized I did it in math and I didn't, so oh well. But let's say you're at half, right? If you're at half health, you gain 10% max HP as bonus HP, which means 40% is really 44%. And hey, if you gain 25%, let's say you're at 40% missing, so 60% health, so it's another 10% gain. 60 becomes 66%. Yeah, okay. So realistically, this is not actually a nerf because this is feeding into this number and actually making it better. So not only is this a bunch of max HP, which bypasses grievous wounds, which is obviously good in the first place, so that's already a buff. But it also gives him a bunch of bonus HP, which feeds into several of his other abilities that deal more damage. His E and whatnot do more damage with and his W, I believe, both deal more damage with health, which is pretty valuable. And then also, as long as you're casting it, at a bit below half HP, and then like a bit below half HP again, you're actually getting more than this. You're actually getting more healing overall. So pretty much a strict buff to Dr. Mundo. Seems quite good. This guy's going to be very, very strong. Mundo, I think, is a very, very good top laner and probably worth playing next patch a lot. So next up we have Fizz. People I've seen on the internet are saying that, this Fizz change is a really, really huge nerf. I'm not confident that's true. So the damage reduction of his basic attacks has been doubled from 4 to 8. I want to point out this is pre-armor. This is before all other forms of damage reduction. It's not like Leona W where it's after armor MR. This is, they don't want to incentivize Fizz to go stack armor or MR to make this ability good. But, basically taking 4 less damage per auto attack is if you go from taking, let's say they have like 60 AD level 1, it's like Lucian with the Doran's Blade. So you go from taking, 56 to 52. So it's like 8% less damage taken. That's like a good 10 armor against auto attacks. Like that's not bad. 10-ish armor against auto attacks is actually pretty good. So okay, sure, right? In all those bad matchups, he has 10 armor at level 1, which is like a lot of armor at level 1. So does not seem horrible, seems pretty useful. Okay, great. It does say basic attacks. This might include minion attacks as well, which does even more to really clamp down how much you're taking from, trading into the champion that having the minion wave hit you. If it does affect minion auto attacks, it's actually a lot of health gain back. This is a very, very, very big buff if it affects minions. Really, really, really big. Next up, Seastone's Trident just gets 10 flat on hit damage. This is not really the poke execute, but in general, if you can auto attack several times in a fight, which you're going to hope to, it's going to be a lot of damage added back. But of course, his ulti damage is down. Now, of note, actually, these changes ended up being softer on Guppy than on Gigalodon, or however you actually pronounce that one. Small ult versus big ult. So, for example, small ult didn't lose any damage at rank 1 and only lost 25 damage at rank 2. It only lost a 0.1 AP ratio. By comparison, the max range ult lost 50 damage at rank 1, 100 damage at rank 3, and lost 0.2 on the AP ratio. So the nerf is, roughly doubled on this, despite the fact that the damage itself is not twice as high. So we can go look at the numbers real quick. So here's Fizz Small, again, rank 1 of the ultimate, same base damage. AP ratio is only down 12%, and then down, 10 to 14%. So, obviously did get weaker, but at the end of the day, right, if you are getting point blank ults, it's not actually that much worse, right? 12% AP ratio, 40% less damage, and then, more like 10% in the mid game, and really not at all in the early game. For the medium distance, right, it's immediately 10% less damage early game. It's 18% less damage in the late game. The ratio is down 15%. For the big shark, it's 17 early, 20% late, and 17% less AP ratio overall. So in general, this nerfs small shark less. Now, this doesn't have to matter a ton, but it's worth pointing out that, max rank ult goes 300, 350, 400. Like, the actual gain here is just not that big. It's just 50. You just gain 50 damage per range and 0.15 AP ratio per range, which matters quite a bit in the early game in terms of, how much does 100 damage matter? A lot for executing. But really, really late game, this kind of just lets you point blank the ultimate. Just because it wasn't, this got nerfed by more, right? By 100 plus 0.2 AP. This got nerfed by 50 plus 0.1 AP. It just got nerfed by so much less that, like, you can just point blank the ult and do, most of the damage, right? You can do 70% of the damage, basically. So, I don't know. That is one thing that's a little strange, but it does allow Fizz to be more reliable, right? That, if you obviously are getting rewards for landing the big one, obviously you're getting 1/3 more damage, you're getting 1/3 more ratio, but it is only 1/3 more, compared to being more like 50% more, like you're seeing here. So, we'll see if this matters. It might not, but just want to point that out. Overall, I mean, it could be a nerf, but I think, again, I've talked about this in a lot of patch rundowns. I think ults tend to be overrated in patch notes because they are infrequently part of the kit. Whereas this is always on, and this is always on, basically. This is only on sometimes. I mean, I have seen some fizzes just like whiff the ult and then still tower dive and win, or you just like use Zhonya's the shark in the first place, and so like a lot of this does get dodged anyway. Again, the ult is supremely unreliable, and I think in general, he's going to be probably fine. Next up is Gangplank. He did not get hotfix, but he does get compensation buffs for the previous nerfs. If you didn't see my patch 11.17 results video, basically there was not a single item that didn't lose at least 2% win rate on Gangplank. Trinity Force and Essence Reaver are the two most unscathed, and they're still at 45 and 44% win rate respectively. Gangplank is not a strong champion. And so basically they gave him a lot of the health back that he lost from Grasp. So here is the data table for his health before and after, and it's pretty substantially higher. 2100 is totally reasonable for a melee champion, seems pretty good. 570 seems totally reasonable for a melee champion level 1. Gangplank has pretty much, model melee champion health at 570 plus 90, seems totally reasonable. It's a buff of 6 to 9%. Again, considering his core builds tend to be things like Essence Reaver, there is some Trinity Force, which does have health on it, to be clear. But his core builds are more squishy focused. He's going to feel this health quite a bit because he's, not getting health somewhere else. Now, the one other thing I did is I said, well, now, from what I can tell, by the way, Fleet Footwork appears to be the best Gangplank keystone. Last I looked, there's a lot that are pretty close. Fleet Footwork and Airy and Grasp are within about 0.5% of each other, so it's not that far off to maybe pick something else, and it might be a little bit matchup dependent, but Fleet appears to be the best. You can still fleet the enemy champion for full health, so that's actually pretty good, when you're doing that kind of stuff. And just move speed in general is a good start on him, right? He wants to close to melee sometimes, and anyway, moving on. But this is if you're running Grasp before and after. Basically, if you're still going to run it, right, okay. So if you're still running Grasp, instead of gaining 5 max health per Q, you're getting 3 max health per Q. And so if you just take the same rune and run it back and play the same champion, how many Grasps would it have taken to get this much health? So obviously level 1, 15 grasp. Now, this does not count the healing that you get, which is relevant, and the damage you deal to the enemy champion, which is also relevant, right? Again, those things were irrevocably nerfed, but in terms of just the base health coming in and saying, okay, well, we got out of the early game, and now I'm a mid-game Gangplank, I'm on 2 items. It's like, well, did you trigger Grasp 60 times? Probably not. Okay, well, the new Gangplank just has more health than old Gangplank, right? Again, landing phase is definitely worse. We're not going to debate that at all. Once you're out of landing phase and you're like, all right, yep, we're ready for the late game team fight, you did not get 75 grasps off. You didn't. It was a landing phase rune, and then you kind of stopped using it. So he is definitively late game tankier than old Gangplank. His early laning is still also definitively worse, but hey, by the way, he's pushed more toward a late game champion. I'm a fan of these changes. I think they're great. Overall, cool beans. Right, so basically at all points in time, he's always got more health, right? You're not getting 15 grasp level 1, you're not getting 18 grasp level 2. He just always has more health in terms of raw max HP than pre-patch. Okay, this is basically a non-change to Jace. His Hex Capacitor, move speed, and ghost duration is cut from 1 1/4 to 3/4 of a second. Pop quiz, how much move speed does the Jace passive give? And then as a follow-up question, how much total distance did he cover during this or this? Like, how much distance on the map, right? Did he gain above what he would normally walk at? So the move speed was 40 flat, meaning this gave him 50 movement. He moved 50 distance. Far less than a total of a Vayne Tumble. And now he moves a total of 30 distance. It's not a lot. It's not good. Now it's still there to allow him to like walk through his caster minions and then get into melee range, or like get into range for like the hammer, which that still exists. That's totally true. But the move speed is basically non-existent. So yeah, I know they are tuning down his ability to outrun ganks and traverse the map. Again, they are cutting this down to the tune of 20 distance. This can matter, but any win rate change you see in Jace is going to be just pure statistical noise. This is just a non-change to the champion. Next up is Jinx getting some lower mana cost on early game Q. Cool, I like that. You definitely can feel it a fair bit in the early game, so that just kind of feels pretty good. Kai'Sa getting 0 to 2 seconds off of her supercharge cooldown. I didn't do the math for this one because it's a pretty minor change. It's going to kick in from level 8 onwards. We get rank 2 of the Q, rank 2 of the E. Of note, supercharge cools down faster with auto tech, which is part of the reason this math isn't very useful. So basically, this buff is a little bit better than it looks. It's probably more than 20% off the cooldown because you're going to auto attack. And, going from an 8-second cooldown to a 6-second cooldown because you auto attacked a whole bunch is a really substantial cooldown cut, right? It's 25% off as opposed to 12 becoming 10, which is, less so. It's under 20% instead of, the real number being more than 25%. Okay. Next up is Kalista having an early game focused nerf. 1.51752 becomes 1.52. I am in general still not a big fan of CC duration scaling, especially knockups, which feels really strange. That said, I don't know what they would do to like make this reasonable. Kalista obviously, last I checked, tends to always be a pretty low solo queue winner champion. She's really early game focused, and so how do you how do you give her a good late game when she kind of doesn't have a W? I mean, she already has really, really, really high stat growth overall. They've done really weird stuff with her passive to where she doesn't power spike quite as hard off of like her first AD item. There's like a whole bunch of stuff going on with Kalista to try to skew this away, but look, she's just so early in focus because, hey, she can literally just chase you down in laning phase and then rend you for 500 and you're just dead. Like, that's tough to beat. When you screw up once, you just die to her. You have to play so safely in bot lane to handle that. It's like, I get how tough that is. And obviously they're saying her gank setup is going to be a pretty big deal. That's totally reasonable. But yeah, so anyway, substantially lower knockup duration in the early game. Not so harsh at level 11, and obviously the same at 16 plus, which is like usually not relevant. Yeah, that'll hit pro a little bit. This is not going to do a ton for solo queue. It will matter some, but yeah, I mean, she'll be slightly weak in solo queue probably, and that's going to be okay. Karma gets 2 armor and 10 points on the shield. We have numbers for this one. 2 armor is basically 1.5% more durability, eventually 1% more durability late game. Karma has very, very, very high armor at level 18. 90s is quite high for range champion. It's not the absolute highest, but it's still quite high. Just found kind of interesting, that's all. As far as the shield value, as far as I can tell, Riot has kind of successfully, if you want to call it that, pushed Karma into Qmax for support. That is her higher win rate build in support. It is worth noting that Karma is not a 46% win rate champion with pro presence. Because to be fair, that is where Karma has been before. Karma has been a 45% win rate champion because people get the shield max on her, and well, she's a pro-focused team fighter, so I guess get effed. Everyone wants to play her in solo queue. And so, just sort of soft buffs. They are pretty early game focused, right? It's 10 flat on the shield. It's 2 armor in the early game. This pushes her toward pro play, pushes her toward early game a little bit. Because, hey, maybe we'll see enchanters once in a while. But Karma is in an okay-ish, like, she's not great, to be clear. But she's not horrible. And she's had some really bad points in her career before. She's like an okay solo queue support. And these buffs are pretty meaningful, so Karma should be like pretty well balanced to maybe slightly strong in solo queue, which should be pretty good. Next up is Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw getting a pretty big buff to AP Kog'Maw. The flat damage is going nowhere, but the AP ratio is going up by 0.2, which is quite a lot. So here is our data table. Because obviously the base damage is unchanged, we're going to assume some ability power. The standard that I'd use is 15 ability power per level, which is about accurate. And yeah, I mean, not bad, right? We're looking at, for what, a mythic, which is, maybe 100 AP around this point in time. Yeah, it's like, 8% more damage. We're looking at 2 items here, so we're looking at 160 ability power, maybe around here, something like that. 10% more damage as you've, maxed out the ability. But yeah, pretty good. And obviously as you get towards death cap, and if you're safe, that's gonna Eyes. It goes up and up and up and up. This is pretty meaningful. Now, E is, I would say, debatably the first or second most important ability on AP Cog. Obviously, the ult is a really big deal, but until you get rank 3 ult, it's a little bit hairy, right? Because you're not really so far out of range that you're just actually playing ult only, so your E really, really matters. And it's your primary wave clear and whatnot, and so you're hitting wave clear breakpoints a bit early and whatnot. But the one thing I want to bring up as well is that basically the E now has a real champion's AP ratio, right? That, I mean, it was miserable before, right? Before it was 0.5. So if you compare what the old one was, it's like, yeah, it took 500 AP to double the damage in the E. Like, that's completely unrealistic. Like, there's no wonder AP Cog was trash, because it just took way too much ability power to get meaningful damage gains. In general, again, my rule of thumb, as long as there's a 3 in front, it's probably a pretty reasonable AP ratio for normal ability. It's okay to have things go more aggressive if they're normally tanks. So things like Singed, right? Like really, really risky melee champions need really heavily pushed AP ratios, because how are you going to get Singed to build a Void Staff or something, or a Cosmic Drive, when he has to literally walk at people to fling them? Like, he has to play an actual melee. You look at champions like Echo, who had problems before where he was being a full tank. It's like, yeah, you need really, really aggressive AP ratios because you have to auto attack people in melee range twice as part of your core combo, basically. Yeah, you're not building a death cap on that champion, right? You're going to build full tank and just use your base values because, 350 AP can double my damage, but so can surviving for twice as long. So let's just do it that way. And that's, like, I think a really reasonable thing to talk about. Um, so so basically to me it's like, okay, look, if you are expecting to be a squishy mage, like, you better have AP ratios better than 400 AP to double, or your ratios really, really suck and you're probably just a bad champion. Or this ability just isn't useful late game. And that generally tends to be true for me. Again, for range champions, you don't want to see things generally these things under 300. That means it's probably way too pushed and you're like really, 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 really AP focused. You're just farm focused, which probably makes you a bit pro based. Because now it's just how well can you earn gold, instead of just your levels mattering. Just generally where I've seen things to be, so I wanted to bring that up. But yeah, this buff seems good. AP Cog is not very strong, and this should be a pretty meaningful buff. So next up is Lee Sin. He is definitely high pro pick in jungle. What's kind of funny is, so from what I can recall, and my memory's not perfect here. I didn't look it up with absolute certainty. Lee Sin wasn't seen for a long time, and then they gave him buffs to like his E cooldown and stuff, and was like, yeah, okay, Lee Sin, here's some buffs, go be a fun jungler, right? Because we didn't see him really at all. We saw other champions. And pros were like, ooh, Lee Sin's a top laner? Okay, let's play him top and mid. Okay, sure, whatever. And so then he got nerfed like below what he was before, basically, right? Like his lifesteal and spell vamp went down. I think like his health regen went somewhere. Like they nerfed the E to like only a 1 second buff from before, so it's 9 instead of 8 instead of 10. And people are like, yeah, Lee Sin's best jungler in the game. Play him every single time, but it's like, where were you in spring at MSI? Like, he was a good jungler already. What is this? And again, I'd have to look at like all of the exact data to be sure, but this feels like the kind of thing, right? Where I know people like to say placebo buffs. I don't think buffs are ever really meant to be placebo buffs. Like they're meant to do something. But yeah, sometimes they are meant to be like, hey, remember this champion? I'm willing to bet that if you just look at Lee Sin's patch history and compare it to his pro presence as a jungler, there were large swaths of time where he was an absolutely outstanding jungler and just no one picked him, and now he's 100% pick ban weaker than it was before. This happens a lot. There's a couple chances per year. This always happens. Anyway, Lee Sin losing to AD is not a huge deal. None of his abilities are total AD ratios. Q and E are both bonus AD, and so is the R. I would not mind Lee Sin getting total AD ratios. My understanding is Lee Sin is slightly pro skewed. I could be wrong about that. If that's wrong, then never mind, right? Like, forget what I said. But giving champions total AD ratios gives them some late game, right? It says, well, it's not a ton, right? I mean, you're going from 70 to 133, you're getting 60 more base AD. So like if your AD ratio is 1.0, right, and your ability does 100 damage at rank 1 and 300 damage at rank 3 or rank 5 rather, it's like, well, okay, if it's 300 damage at rank 5, that means it's 205 plus 1.0 total AD, which goes from 300 to 338. Like, it's not that much more. It's 10% more base damage, which is something, but like it's not a ton, right? And so, is that a huge deal? No, it doesn't really do a lot, but it can matter sometimes. Just, random thing. Anyway, yeah. 2 base AD very, very slightly, slows down his early jungle clear. Like there's going to be breakpoints where you have to, let an extra auto attack or something, or, more, further optimized to knock things down. Okay, whatever. Okay, early game nerf, early game dueling nerf. Okay, great. Next up is Lilia. So Lilia is an OP top laner and an okay jungler. I've been really enjoying Lilia. I think she's a lot of fun. She's one of my best junglers. I've really enjoyed her. She fits my play style. I think she's super, super fun to play. I think more people should play Lilia. The only thing I don't like about Lilia is her voice lines. she's I think the only champion where I play and I actually don't like her voice. I mean, her voice is fine. I don't mind Scottish people or anything. I'm part Scottish, but um, I don't like her lines. Um, Anyway, she is an OP top laner, and for most people, a slightly underpowered jungler. So her base health regen is getting hit with a truck. Like it's 1/3. I have never seen Riot make anything 1/3 the number it was before. I can't think of a single thing where this happened. It is 1/3 the number. That is really, really absurd. So she goes from having like normal champion base regen, which is 7.5 per second, or sorry, 7.5 per 5 or 1.5 per second. That's like very, very standard. That's like the median health regen in League of Legends, I'm pretty sure. And this regen per level is about the same as well. To just like hard trash. That said, they're aware she's not great in the jungle. So hey, we're giving you. And by the way, this is kind of weird. It's not quite apples to apples. So this is the regen over 3 seconds. Um, I'm 90% certain because basically her passive says you do 6% max health over the course of 3 seconds, and over that duration you heal. And so there's a healing against minions, there's a healing against large monsters, which is by the way capped at only once. So like if you're double camping blue and Gromp, you're not getting twice the regen actually. The regen is like going to waste. You're obviously clearing faster because you're dotting both of them and hitting Q on both of them, whatever. But you're actually not regening through that. Which probably to be fair, like helps with high elo skew because good players double camp and bad players don't know how to do that. So like I get that not existing. I don't mind it. But her clear is quite unhealthy. At least the first couple camps, it's a little rough. Early Lily clear is a little bit low health. But okay, so she's getting some healing back. So couple other things. Okay, so the healing is the region's up a little bit. I want to point out that the designer, I'm very upset with the designer here. I don't know why they did this. So the base regen went up from 18 to 27, which is a clear plus 9, and then the level 18 went from 94 to 104, which is plus 10, which means we're no longer getting a flat value. We're no longer getting a natural number per level. I don't know why 1/17th health regen got added, but it did. So it doesn't matter really in any way because there's an AP ratio attached, and the tooltip in game rounds the number, and it truly does not matter because even when I'm writing down the numbers for myself, when I'm like doing patch rundowns, I just say, okay, what's 18, what's 94? Okay, what's the difference? Divided by 17 and drag the column, right? Like nothing matters about these numbers not being clean, but I care. I shouldn't, and I do. Okay, let's move on. So she's going to regen back to compensate for health regen going down because her jungle clear is not very healthy. We'll talk about that in a second. Her Q move speed going from 5.1 to 6.5 is a really big deal, by the way. This is a really big deal for jungle clear. Basically, your Q cooldown is just good enough that you can kind of keep your Q permastat going and it's fine. But going between camps, you basically lose all of your stacks. It is basically impossible to get from Krugs to Raptors and keep your move speed. It doesn't really matter because it falls off like right as you're reaching Raptors, so you're like maybe lose a quarter of a second. Like it's not a really big deal. But technically, like the stacks fall off, and then okay, cutting Raptors is maybe a little bit slower. You probably get back to 4 stacks by the time you're done with Raptors, but like not always. It depends like what level you are, because like how many Qs it takes to kill them, and then Raptors to Wolves can be a little bit right. So like just the stacks kind of fall off while you're jungle clearing. Even if you're cutting camps pretty well. And basically this prevents that. That if you're cutting camps like at all, you're going to keep your move speed stacks and get between camps faster and get among your, to your next camp faster. So that's going to do a fair bit for jungle clear speed, right? That just and it matters more people who don't kite very well, because if you kite Raptors really, really well, like you can get to Wolves without losing any move speed. You can get from Wolves down to Blue, no problem. But the Krugs Raptors is the really big one, and going like from Gromp Blue like over to Scuttle Crab, like that's going to matter. So this is going to help that a little bit. And it's just in general, you're going to kite better in team fights, which is kind of good. And then there's Swirl Seed getting 2 seconds off the cooldown. This is one that was nerfed a ton when they did the reshape a few patches ago. That got me back into playing Lilia. It was a really good reshape. Super big fan of all the changes there. Like really, really well done. The designer who made those changes, I think, just really incredible. But Swirl Seed, yeah, 2 seconds off the cooldown. This is one thing that definitely hurt a bit. And I get it, it's fine. I'm not mad about it, but like this was a really long cooldown. 18 seconds is a really, really long cooldown. If I used it to clear a camp, and like sometimes it was correct to do so, especially in the early clear, where like I'm trying to get my passive to stay on because my cooldowns are really long. It's like, ooh, and now it's down for the gank. And I have to wait a really long time for Sword to come back up, and it's rough. And even though you would tend to go Leandries, you would tend to go for Boot to Lucidity, so you'd get a lot of ability haste, you would still feel this cooldown quite a bit. So this is going to feel really good as a buff. So like these are all things that like Like these three changes, well, these two changes specifically, I feel like someone who like they actually get Lilia jungle, which is great. Like, well done. These are like the exact buffs that like I would want as someone playing Lilia. I'm like, yeah, these are frustrating. Thanks. Anyway, let's do the math. Okay, so here is her base health regen. Yeah, it's health per minute is like the standard that I use. Unless I'm like hard trolling, I don't believe I am. Yeah, she still gets. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not hard trolling here. I'm gonna pause and double check something real quick. Okay, yeah, I thought something was wrong, and it was. Okay, so we can quickly make this green. So the way this was written was pretty troll. So this was written in health per second. This is written in health per 5. So like I said, it's not my human error, but one of the things I could have caught, you know? This is health per second. This is health per 5. I was like, wow, really? She doubles her health regen per level? That's weird. And then just like didn't think anything of it. Yeah, so she doesn't in fact gain that much health per second. Okay, this is the real numbers. Yeah, down by a lot still. Anyway, the per second regen did not get changed by as much as you might have thought. So anyway, yeah, pretty big nerf here. Overall, much less regen, and yeah, she goes from 1.5 per second eventually to 4 health per second to 0.5 to 2. It's quite low. But we have, hey, but what when she's jungling? Now there is a caveat here. So the healing against large monsters, right, is up 9 over the course of 3 seconds, which means it's up 3 per second for 3 seconds. The problem is her early Q cooldown is not 3 seconds. And her early W cooldown is like twice her Q. So even if you do like Q, then wait, then W, then Q, you're still gonna have some time where your passive isn't back up, and you're without this healing, and you're without the passive dot as well. So the actual change here is somewhat, not as good as you might think. So again, if we're up 3 per second, aka we're up 180 per minute, we're really only up 90 per minute because it's only up half the time. It's like, well, okay, we cut 90 off of this, and it's still 480, and it's still higher. So as far as I can tell, this is still overall, in basically all cases, even if you really suck at juggling your passive, it is still more regen while jungling. So Lilia's over, and to be clear, like a jungle clear takes like 2 minutes, right? So she's getting 50 to 100 health back per per minute for 2 minutes ish. I know cutting it down a little bit, but basically her jungler ends up being over 100 health healthier is the TLDR, which is really good because that's about how much she's missing if you use your second smite on the last camp. This probably means she doesn't have to use a second smite on the last camp. You should be able to clear about 315, getting all your camps and being ready for Scuttle with a smite up as well. So yeah, this should be pretty meaningful if you get a good leash. That her clear is going to be quite a bit healthier and quite good. So yeah, Lilia jungle. I mean, right? This is a buff. This is a buff, and this is a buff. They're not huge, but they matter. Top Lilia, this is a really big nerf. So yeah, this should do, obviously, like these buff top Lilia as well, don't get me wrong, but yeah, this should do quite a bit for jungle Lilia, and top Lilia should lose some win rate, and that's both good. All right, next up, Misfortune is getting 2 more total waves on bullet time. One thing that's interesting of Misfortune, as far as I can tell, her ultimate just does % total AD. There's no base damage at all. You just get more waves per rank up, so it's a very flat percentage gain by rank. But here's the total damage of the ult before using any bonus AD anywhere. So okay, looks pretty good, pretty solid damage gain. Once again, pretty early focus. Misfortune has tended to be better in solo queue than pro, so this buff is more early game, and that seems good. Next up is Morgana, getting 2 seconds off of Black Shield. Cool, great, yep. Another champ where it's like, yeah, okay. They can just push enchanters a bit more towards early game and get them, more toward pro play. That seems reasonable. Okay, great. Next up is Qiyana, and I'm pretty sure Qiyana's going to get deleted from this patch. So first of all, they are making her a jungle mid flex, which is going to matter, and they're doing some preemptive, really big nerfs to mid Qiyana. Okay, so her base attack speed's up 10%. Okay, her base health regen is down. Okay, sure. That's fine, I guess. Whatever, bit less regen. Okay, sure. This is backwards, right? There's always a chance it's backwards, but moving on. Assuming it's accurate, then we move on. Q does more damage to monsters. Okay, cool. Yeah, great. Faster jungle clear. Great. Um, and now her EQ no longer tracks champions. If they dash, if they go invisible, it doesn't track them. It just goes where she saw them last. So hey, when you hit Q, dang, right? If they dash during the EQ buffer, it'll aim at last position before dashing. Now, theoretically, I guess, yeah, because your E just always goes toward them. And so you have to wait to Q, or you just say, I don't think you're going to dash. Okay, fair enough. So big nerf here. It doesn't track. It doesn't track stealth. Does more to monsters. Okay, 10 damage off the E. So none of these are buffed to mid Kiana. And from what I could tell, mid Kiana isn't that strong. She seems to be sub 50% win rate by a little bit. Like, she's not horrible, but she's not busted as far as I can tell. She seems fine. But as far as I can tell, like, a regen got nerfed, E damage got nerfed, and the EQ tracking got nerfed. So I feel like mid Kiana is just dead. But maybe jungle Kiana is going to be hype. I guess we'll see what happens. Next up is Renekton. Renekton is losing some empowered stun duration. Retains his, I spend half the time locked out that you spend stunned, right? So 0.75 becomes 0.5 as a 1.5 second stun becomes a 1 second stun. Yeah, basically, Riot keeps trying to find ways to nerf early game Renekton, right? To nerf the really, really strong gank assist, the really early lane priority, and we're, 6 nerfs on Renekton on the year, and pros are still just playing Renekton. Like, this wouldn't have to happen if pros would just play other top laners, but apparently they all believe Renekton is the top laner. You must play him. He is going to be the lane bully. We'll stumble from there. Let's do it. We're going to play through top. And maybe that's true. Like, maybe pros have really solved it, and that's where they're going to make it happen, and they're really accurate. But man, does Renekton suck in solo queue. He's really, 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 really bad in solo queue. Unlucky. So let's see. Okay, cool. Great. End of the day, we'll see if he gets nerfed enough. We'll see if pros get off of him. Obviously, there's no chance Riot does any follow up. So post Worlds, they'll probably do some other Renekton changes. But yeah, seems like the kind of champion who, like, hey, can you nerf his base stats to 500 health and give him more health scaling? Can you nerf his base armor to something really stupid and give him more there, right? Like, I think next season I'd like to see a Sylas-esque base stat reshape on Renekton. And see where they can go. And it's interesting too because, like, all of his abilities have good rank up values. Maybe his actual stat growth is really, really bad, but yeah, kind of sucks to suck for him. So I actually went and looked real quick because I was curious, and actually, yeah, there's actually room to go for Riot for base stats. So base health 575 plus 87 per rank. So he has higher level 1 health and less health growth than new, like, Dispatch Gangplank. So, like, that could be shifted to make him, like, less early game. His base AD is 69, nice, but his growth is 3.75, which is actually pretty high as well. But like that's another one where there's room to skew lower early and better late. So there is a lot of room for, like, the very basic sort of, hey, let's change you kind of stuff. His base AS is very, very high. Like, really, 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 really high. So yeah, there is a lot that honestly Riot could do to, basically Sylas changes, right? Where Sylas was changed to just, like, completely brick his early game stats, but give him really, really good scaling. And okay, Sylas' scaling is, like, really absurd, but I think you could Sylas this guy, and you'd get some pretty good gains here. So that's what I would like to see at some point in time. Like, I would like to see that probably early round of the year, but it might just be that Renekton doesn't actually have a elo skew. It's just pro only. That might be true. I'm not sure, but anyway, just of note. All right, moving on though, because yeah, there's nothing else to talk about. We have Rumble. So I talked about it earlier in the preamble. When Riot nerfs champions for pro, they don't actually want to nerf them entirely out of pro play because then they're bad in solo queue and unseen in pro, and that's just a garbage champion. They want to nerf them, like, half their presence down, right? They want to go from 80% to 40% presence pretty much every time. And so the Scrap Shield change deleted him from the jungle. He was basically just went away entirely. A couple people played him. That was stupid. And then they got off that entirely. They just went, we'll just play Diana or whatever else. We're just gonna get off that. Correct choice, by the way. So this is okay. Let's take a different approach. Instead of making the W cooldown, let's just make the attack speed scale with rank or with champion level, which is, like, yeah, that's absolutely great. So basically, here is Rumble's overall attack speed before and after the change. Basically, first 10 levels is worse. Less than levels is better because, of course, it's a minus 30 at high levels and plus 30 at low, or minus 30 plus 30, right? Exactly breaks even at the middle. So yep, 9 and 10 is the break point. Who would have surprised? Who's surprised here? But yeah, this helps make him less early game skewed, and that's good. In general, Rumble has a very early game skew problem. I think part of it is probably the AP ratio on his ult is bad. It's really low compared to the base damage. Um, and I mean, you think about like the abilities he has to rank up, right? His Q damage scales really aggressively, and you max it out by level 9. You're like, okay, well, I've maxed out my primary damage tool. I can get some harpoons. I've got my passive. I've got points in shield. I really don't care. Like, yeah, there's right. It's just there's some wonkiness there, right? He just like stopped scaling after level 11, really. And lo and behold, Rumble is an early and focused champion, which means he is high elo skewed as a mid laner because high elo games tend to end earlier, either because people are more likely to surrender or they're better at ending games. It's a mix of the two, is my opinion. Um, so he's early game skewed, and he's also similarly early game skewed as a jungler. So when people looked at Rumble win rate stuff and looked at him back during the MSI meta, one of the things that was brought up, which was I think really kind of not misguided, but it ended up being stupid, is if you look at, for example, Korean solo queue, Korean challenger solo queue for Rumble, he's really high win rate. And you truly are not allowed, well, I mean, you are allowed, but like, you truly should not be doing this as your measurement. Because certainly pro does appear to be somewhat early game skewed, and that's fair. But Korean Challenger Solo Queue is the most early game skewed environment on the planet. So first of all, Korea has like double the surrender rate of like the average server. So like games in Korea really often end at 15 and 20 from surrenders. Um, which means they are heavily overrating early game. Because the kinds of champions you see in Korean solo queue also aren't the ones you see in pro, right? Like Lucian top every game in Korean solo queue back in the day, and Lucian mid every game in Korean solo queue back in the day. Like they were viable, but you saw them every time. You only saw Lucians and Callistas and Rumbles and Graves and stuff like that. Like you only saw early game champions in Challenger Korean solo queue because that's all you could play to get the Challenger because everyone would surrender at 15. And so you had to play an early game champion. Like you just couldn't get, like you weren't allowed to play Azir or Ryze. In solo queue, you couldn't play as well. Actually, Azir back then was a lane bully, so okay, you could. But like you weren't allowed to play scaling champions, and you kind of still aren't, right? The surrender rate is too high to actually allow you to play scaling champions. This is just true. And so that environment is different from other people's environment when they're playing solo queue. That environment is different from pro play, where yes, pro play like early game matters, but people are not FF15ing in pro play, right? They're not. No one does, which means every champion that forces an FF15 is overrated in Korean Challenger solo queue, and that's it, right? Is overrated from Korean Challenger solo queue. Which means you kind of can't take the measurements. And Rumble, by the way, of course, is an early game champion, right? Your damage stops scaling at level 9, basically. All you have is one ability. So lo and behold, look, the most early game skewed champion of all time is really good in Korean Challenger solo queue. Oh, who would have seen this coming? So yeah, that's like the point I want to kind of bring up is like, hey, this is the thing that happens when you look too narrowly at data. Because it won't always just be a variance thing. It's a sampling problem. Like you're sampling a very distinct population, which has its own distinct like sort of functionality. That is to say, right, early game weaker, late game better. Doing things like this to flatten out Rumble is good. I will say one thing that happens to Mordekaiser Q, Mordekaiser Q and Zoe Q as well. I actually like these both. It's like, hey, we have champions who like we know the last ability doesn't do any damage, right? Mordekaiser's shield doesn't do any damage. Zoe, Spell Thief, and E, like okay, the E matters, but like Spell Thief doesn't really have a good rank up. Like that matters that much anymore. Like her poke profile just disappears off a cliff. And so it's like, hey, these champions, their Q, their damage just scales off champion level. Which means they don't power spike quite as hard on 9, but they also get to keep scaling throughout the game, so they're not just like, well, level 9 and done power spike champion. Like Zoe doesn't have a real ultimate, right? Like, what's level 16 give for her? But a shorter cooldown on the teleport? Like, I mean, it matters, but like, Karthus gets like 150 damage globally. when he gets 16. Like, that matters, right? That actually does something. Rumble at least gets some damage on his ultimate and whatnot. You don't get anything like that for Zoe. So it's like, okay, yeah, Zoe and Mordekaiser are in kind of similar boat, right? Like, the R doesn't really give you more damage on rank up. It kind of does, but it's like, okay, well, yeah, these champions are gonna just, their base damages are gonna scale with champion level. Rumble probably could use that. I think Rumble could really use some flattening where it's like, yeah, your Q damage eventually becomes 400 at level 18, but it's only 280 at level 9, right? Let's add some numbers. You know, I don't know, that does his total. I mean, who cares? You can scale however you want, right? But that's the kind of thing that would flatten out Rumble a bit and make him less absurdly early game skewed. And again, there's a data table. Okay, great. Next up is Singed. His R now makes all his damage apply grievous wounds at 40%. Cool. Soraka, her ult now cleanses grievous wounds. Also pretty big deal. But I mean, this should be pretty meaningful buff. There's going to be several Sins matchups where he really cares about cutting the healing. I don't know if it makes him a Mundo counter pick. Because obviously he just immunes your fling. And like his passive, I'm pretty sure he takes less damage from his passive than he would have taken. Well, I guess this fling still does damage, right? So it's a decent chunk of damage. You can stomp on the syringe afterwards, so he doesn't get to heal afterwards. Like, maybe it's okay, and then you can maybe fling a second time when it's still on cooldown, and it works out okay. But, you know, maybe it's not bad. But, yeah, I'm not sure what the match is going to look like, but should obviously be a pretty meaningful buff. Soraka loses grievous wounds. Okay, great. Yeah, we talked about that already. So pretty big buff to mid Taliyah. You now get half the cooldown back as well when you cast on worked ground. The radius is now much smaller. The total area covered by worked ground is almost half now, I believe. So that's pretty meaningful, and maybe a bit less than half from that. Actually, yeah, it should be 4/9, right? 44%. If my numbers are correct. And then the duration is obviously much lower. So, okay, mid Taliyah. So first of all, I want to point out, if you're good at jungle Taliyah, you are never getting screwed by worked ground anyway. You can kite the camps properly and always get a full cast. So, and 45 seconds is obviously short enough that your camps come back well after that one. So jungle Taliyah never walked into this, had a problem if you were good at kiting and you were good at jungle Taliyah. So this doesn't have an impact almost at all for high elo jungle Taliyah. And by the way, jungle Taliyah is a totally reasonable champion. She's totally fine. She's completely playable. Next up is mid Taliyah though. And mid Taliyah has to sit in mid lane. And okay, now worked ground is only up every wave instead of basically across 2 waves at a time. You have a lot more room to work around. Again, it's up almost half as often, or, you know, up there's half as much worked ground up. And even if you do get like a crappy worked ground Q, it still only costs 1 mana, but the cooldown's really short. And so you can actually maybe use it on purpose. And that's okay. Because 1 mana half cooldown Qs are like really easy to toss, and you know, you can last 8 minutes with them without spending mana, and this is a really big buff. Like, this by itself to me is the biggest buff to mid Taliyah. This is going to do a lot for Taliyah. She's going to be a lot stronger. I'm not sure if she's quite going to be there, but this could easily be like a 4% win rate gain. 4 seems high. 2% win rate gain to mid Taliyah. I don't know. It's hard to say. This is really hard to properly gauge, but this could be really huge. Next up is Talon. Talon is definitely too good in solo queue. Talon has a problem where you get to build Gore Drinker and full Bruiser on him, and it's really frustrating. His base damage is just too high. So he has to build Bruiser, which doesn't really have terribly efficient damage because, you know, you're getting similar-ish AD to lethality items. Similar-ish. But you're not getting lethality, so you aren't amping your damage quite as high. That said, Talon's damage is high enough that he's still lethal despite building Bruiser and not building lethality. There's also an interesting thing where Bruiser Mythics deal more damage than lethality Mythics. So the 1.0 total AD on a Gore Drinker, for example, does more damage than a Duskblade auto attack. Now, Duskblade resets sooner, and the invisibility is good, and you know, there's a bunch of other details that happen here, but the actual damage dealt by a Gore Drinker, just the active, is higher than the damage dealt by other Mythics, which is a little strange. But, you know, maybe it should be, you know, tapped down a little bit. I'm not sure. Either way, 0 to 20 damage off of the Q. It is something that you max second, as far as I can tell. You definitively max a second. It used to be something you could max first, but that's gone, at least for most matchups. But yeah, 20 flat damage off is quite meaningful. Obviously, you can multiply this if you're in melee range to deal that extra damage there. So as far as like, hey, what portion of your full combo at, level 13 is Q damage? Well, slightly larger if you're using ult to get into range and then queuing from melee range. Because you're amping the damage with like a pseudo crit and 20 flat damage is more than 20 flat damage there, and that matters. A Talon jungle buff, W does 50% more damage against monsters. That'll matter quite a bit. That should help your clears. So we'll see if Talon jungle becomes a thing. But man, that dude's gonna like leap over a wall and gank you out of nowhere. Like that man has some really inventive jungle pathing. I'm just like imagining like your blue side, you start blue buff, you clear through bottom side, you go Krugs, you hop over the river wall. Like you hop over Krug wall, hop over dragon, hop over river wall, and then hop over the wall by like bot tier 1, and then gank red side's bot lane. And it's like, you can't even ward that. Like, it could be real degenerate. To be clear, this could be really, really degenerate. But it's interesting to think about now, having not yet played against it. Next up is Thresh, who is losing 5 move speed, which should be pretty meaningful. My supposition is that move speed nerfs mean less for Moby's champions. Certainly, it's going to hurt more mid-combat when you get, stuck with Boots 1. But with Moby's, you tend to already come close to getting diminishing returns anyway, and you're already zipping around the map a lot at, 450-ish move speed, around there. So, what does 5 move speed really do for you? Compared to, say, someone who actually has to walk everywhere and do everything, like, compared to a Nautilus who isn't going Moby's. If a Nautilus is going for Merc Treads, he's going to feel 5 move speed a lot more than Moby's Thresh. Like, in general, that's going to be true. So that's kind of what I'm saying, is that this is going to mean less for Thresh than other champions. But that said, I think that's fine. I think champions who don't need the move speed should just not have a lot of move speed. I think in general, Riot should really keep trying to its very best to not just stat creep the game. Like, I am happy that somehow they still haven't broken base move speed. Like, they haven't just like power crept base move speed just above what it was before. They've actually kept that one in line. And base health regen tends to be within line as well, which is good. Yeah, it's like, I think a lot of things though have just continued to grow and grow and grow. I think health in general has grown a lot, which means that damage then had to grow kind of alongside it to keep up. And then, that gets kind of weird, because if you weren't part of the health growth, like, splurge, then now you're left behind, and I don't know, right? Like, stat creep does really weird things to the game. I think in general, Riot should really, really try hard. And they generally do a pretty good job of not power creeping stuff, but I know, for example, when Runes Reforged came out, they tried really, really hard to say, okay, look, we're going to try to make this as neutral as possible. So when you pick your rune path, you're going to gain some attack speed or AD or health based on whichever sort of, rune paths you chose. And we're going to change everyone's base stats, and, get rid of, the old runes. And they try to be really power neutral about it, which I think was good. I think it made sense. And then, later on, they added stat shards. And basically, stat shards more than made up for the amount of stats gained from like the paths, and then they never like compensated the champion base stats back down, right? So for example, mages basically were compensated the lack of their scaling health seals. Just they all got it as health, right? So they got a bunch of health back. So okay, great, there you go, you got it back, you're fine, because you've gotten rid of these. But we expect you to replace the AP by going like sorcery primary, domination secondary. So you're still gonna have ability power. So it's fine. And then the fact that you were running MR blues, but you're also running some magic pen, like that's fine. That's gonna wash out, whatever, right? But we're gonna compensate you the scaling health because we expect you to run sorcery domination or something like that. And it was pretty accurate. And then they said, okay, we're gonna get rid of the AP on sorcery domination. We're going to give you stat shards that have ability power on them. We're also going to give you stat shards that have armor and health scaling on it. It's like, wait a second. But you compensated us for those. What do you mean we get those back? And we've power crept, right? And now suddenly mages are tankier than they've ever been before. I know I'm going off topic, but talking about power creep. Okay, let's talk back about this, because we're talking about Thresh. Okay, random ramble rather. Okay, so this one's kind of interesting. So Flay, I would actually say, is a buff overall. It depends on math, but I'm thinking it's a buff. Okay, so basically the way Flay works, if you're auto-attacking, you deal your total AD and you deal 1 bonus damage per soul. Functionally, souls are 1 bonus attack damage, kind of. There's a second part to this play. If you aren't auto-attacking, you build up a charge. You build up something like it's a rapid-fire cannon. And it deals 1 to 2 times more of your total AD. Now, not the soul, right? The soul is flat. Actually, this actually might be fine. So I just realized, I think this is, okay, yeah. So, again, before it was, you auto attack, you do, total AD plus soul. And now if you wait, you do 2 times total AD plus 1 per soul. Right? Souls aren't real AD, they're on hit damage. And then if you maxed it, you did 3 times total AD plus 1 per soul. So now, I'm not sure about this, I don't know if the 1.5 per soul is only on the maximum or not. I'm going to assume it is. I'm going to assume it's only on the maximum. And that the just like, on hit Thresh didn't just get stronger. But now it's, you do 1.8 total AD plus 1.5 per soul on a fully charged auto attack. And so that's this. So if you just have total AD, if you somehow don't gain souls ever, and by the way, his most common skill order is Emax second with like 38%. Thresh has a lot of skill orders. Pretty much any permutation can work. It's like, hey, if you max E second, your fully charged attack damage goes from 2.0 total AD to 1.8 total AD. And so for the first 7 levels, yeah, it's actually quite a bit less damage. Which means as soon as you rank up Flay, right, it's like, whack, here's 12 damage I just didn't get anymore. Right? Or, up to 13 less damage I didn't get anymore. Like, that matters. Like, you may think it's small, but like 12 damage in a trade is quite a lot. Like nerfing an ability by 10 damage matters. It does. But now we have an assumption, and these numbers could be wildly inaccurate, like, to be clear. Because keep in mind, XP gain is actually, it's non-linear, right? So getting, 17 to 18 takes longer than getting 1 to 2, obviously. And so saying, 5 souls per level is a bit disingenuous, but like, are you going to have 30 souls at level 6? I'll say probably not, but is that horribly unrealistic? Like, is that so far off from reality? I don't really know, to be fair. I don't really know. But it's worth noting that, hey, at 30 souls, it's a buff. Basically is where that math comes out to. And then obviously the more ranks you get in, like the later this happens, and you get more ranks in the ability, like here, it's like, well, now it's only down by 15%, not 20% total AD, so it's less of a nerf. And, so the point comes down to, yeah, it's about 30 souls to get the break even. 26 really, I think, is the accurate number. At 26 souls, Flay is doing more damage than before. So it's an early game nerf, it's a late game buff. And that said, Thresh is doing pretty well in solo queue. He's not a weak champion by any means, but the 5 move speed is gonna affect everyone, and the Flay is gonna nerf his early game. Okay, great. Trundle is getting a nerf to Pillar of Ice, mostly on the rank up. We aren't going to quite clean numbers, but that's okay. They're trying to get as big a nerf as they can. So basically, Trundle jungle in solo queue, in pick rate and win rate, maxes Pillar last. So this column is how much move speed my foe has while under the effect of my Pillar. 3% more move speed. Not a huge deal. But yeah, eventually 35% more move speed, and that matters. We're going from 6% slow to 46% slow. That's kind of relevant. And then, okay, but support Trundle maxes it first. And again, pick rate win rate says, yes, indeed, you should max it first. And this one is obviously be felt quite a bit more. Again, rank 1 Pillar, only 3% slower, sure, whatever. The cooldown's not changing or anything. The knockback and terrain being in the way, that all still matters. But yeah, if your enemies run at 30% faster, 35% faster, while under the Pillar, yeah, that feels pretty reasonable. And again, as far as I can tell, Pillar Max Trundle is a totally reasonable support champion. He's clearly pretty good. I think, yeah, maybe too much in pro play, arguably. And okay, great. Should still be an okay champion. Shouldn't be a big problem. Maybe he'll be too weak for solo queue. Maybe he'll be too weak for pro. I'm not sure, but he'll be a fine jungler. Next up is Twitch. Twitch is getting 10 flat AD on his ultimate. Here's his total AD during the ulti, before and after. Early game focused. Twitch tends to be really, really good in solo queue and not seen in pro, so good to see that. Ults tend to be pro focused as well. Actually, one thing I'm curious about, because obviously pros are picking for perception. Pros really don't use data, almost at all. They really don't. It can be really hard to convince pros of something using data. Try to convince them of like, hey, no, this build is better. Really, things like Ardent Sensor in the 2017 meta. Things like going Rage Blade instead of Blade of the Rune King on 80 carries. Things like building not Rapid Fire Cannon second on champs like Caitlyn back, last year and before. Like these things that are objectively not as good as their replacements, but pros do it anyway because what they're used to. And it's like, look, I have to try to convince you this is good. And Crown Shot's like, no, I like my moves. It's like, you're Caitlyn, you don't need it. Anyway, it was not to single out Crown Shot. He's one of the many players who built Rapid Fire Cannon on Caitlyn last patch or last season. And I still vehemently believe that was incorrect. Pros do not use data. So they just don't. For the most part, they really just don't. That said, what this is it can be a nerf, or sorry, this can be a buff that does not move the win rate much. Data, right? But it's like, I mean, 40 bonus AD at level 6? Like, yeah, let's do it, right? Like, and so this is why I'm not sure, right? I think ultimate changes are pro focused. So for two things. So one, again, the perception versus data thing, which I think is true and is a real force. Number two, though, is pro is slower paced, right? I mean, in solo queue, you're scrapping 24/7, right? The combined kills per minute of solo queue is always far higher than pro, which means people are scrapping all the time, which means people are scrapping without ultimates up and without summoner spells up. The more power is in ultimates, the less that matters for solo queue because they're down all the time, and the more it matters for pro play because every meaningful fight has all the ultis available. And I think that's also true. I think both those things are relevant. And so that is one more way you can look at pro versus solo queue skew is how much power is in the ultimate. Okay, let's go. And what's interesting is, as far as I can tell, ults are probably more pro only than right. So think about early game is somewhat high elo skewed and somewhat pro skewed, and so it kind of goes up to the right. You have like really big outsiders or outliers like Korea Challenger, where it's just surrenders all the time. But in general, up into the right. And this is like very provable that as you change base health and health scaling or base AD and AD scaling, you right, early game is definitely high elo skewed. Like this is like known. I am curious. This is hard to test because again, you have a layer of removal here. When you change ult power, right? Are you affecting high elo as well, or are you just affecting pro, right? Because there are champions like Rise, where Rise, like so we'll take more time on this one because my asides are what you watched this for, obviously. So a champion like Azir, right, is trash and bronze, and it just goes up and to the right, up and to the right. I know I'm going to the left because whatever, but it goes up and to the right, with elo, right, and it actually crests 50% win rate in Challenger, and obviously, of course, we see Azir in pro play, right, up and to the right, up to the right, up to the right. Azir is a scales with the elo champion. Some of that is I really do think he can lane bully, but also I think the mechanical complexity is really up there. But Rumble mid is another champion where it skews up to the right. A lot of early game champions do this as well. But there are some champions like Rise where they don't skew. Rise does not actually go up with elo, and he's trash at every elo, and then we see him in pro. Right? Like Azir catches up in pro, right? And Amumu just like falls, right? Amumu is like really good, and then just like okay and plat, bad and diamond, like unplayable master plus. And obviously we don't see him in pro at all. Just falls off a cliff. Sure, okay, makes sense. And Zero does the opposite. Rise is pretty much just flat. Like Rise is just like here's variation, and then we see him in pro. And I'm curious if that is because Rise is ultimate, right? Because ultimates are pro skewed. And ulting your team into a Baron pit, good luck. Right? Like, good luck ever doing that in solo queue. Even in Challenger solo queue. Like, no, people have their heads cut off in Challenger solo queue. Are you kidding? They're monkeys running around just like flinging poop at each other. Absolutely. Man, like it's true. Like every challenger is every service challenger is a clown fiesta. It's just true. So yeah, I am curious, right? If that is how to fix that kind of stuff. Because I think about it and it's like, all the really esoteric ultimates that like don't do anything, I'm thinking of old Tom Kench. I'm thinking of current Rise. It's like, yeah, they're really just pro skewed because like those ultimates they just don't work in solo queue. They just don't fit the environment. And so anytime you have an esoteric ultimate that doesn't just like hit button kill champion to some degree, yeah, they probably are pro bound. That probably makes sense. I bet you that's true. I mean, I guess yeah, because like even Bard at least is like, no, I just stunned a bunch of idiots. Like Bard, I think has like direct value, um, more so than like a Tom Kench or a Rise. So I will maintain that Bard actually still fits the press R, do something meaningful right away. All right, moving on though, because yes, of course we should move on. Urgot gets some early game buffs to his Q. Q is meant to be max last, as far as I can tell. The E rank up for the shield is quite good, and obviously you max W first, so you're getting this 2-second cooldown for a very, very long portion of the time. Urgot seems to be pretty good champ, so cool beans. Some good Urgot. Varus loses 2 AD and some attack speed early game. Again, early game focus changes onto Varus. Um, This is taking his total AD and the on-hit damage and adding it together. W is maxed last in solo queue. I didn't bother check pro play because I just don't care. If it's done differently there, the numbers aren't going to be that different anyway because it's still -2 regardless. Here is his attacks per second. Not using any of the like attack speed feeds into the passive and does more stuff there. It's just not really that important. Yep, it is 8% less attack speed early on, about 4% less attack speed later on, and then obviously the same at 13 plus. The more attack speed you buy, not only does it matter less because you have more attack speed, but also the actual attack speed gained by this also scales of attack speed, so there's even more going on there. But again, early game nerfs to Varus, cool beans. Yone gets twice as much shielding per other champion hit, so small stuff there, pretty good. Yuumi getting better early cooldown on Bob and block again. So Yumi's a champion actually who scales really, really well with game time. So I think she and Sona both are basically hyper scaling supports. If you can get out of the early game, they are outstanding. So Yuumi, loves getting out of the landing phase equal and then hopping on the Olaf or the Nocturne and just winning through jungle roams. And she doesn't really care about getting levels anymore because once she's kind of maxed out her E, she's gonna watch you kill jungle camps, and that's fine. And then you're just gonna like go kill some bot lane in the 2-on-2 because you're Yuumi plus Fed Nocturne, and goodbye to them. She really wants to get out of the laning phase, and so basically Yuumi is an okay champ in solo queue. Obviously, we don't see her in pro really at all, but hey, early game buffs, right? Make her stronger in the early game, more shields, more opportunity to fight people. Let's go for it. And I'm glad it's lower cooldown and not like here's more shielding, because I do really like the counterplay of okay, she's gonna hop off and go for a shield. I'm gonna flash flay her, and we got her right. We landed the CC. She doesn't have flash. She's definitely dying now that we flayed her. Twist jumped on, and Yumi's instantly dead. So that's obviously always a little bit scary. If she's ever in range of a flash flay, jumping off can mean instantly dying. If Leona can land her E in time, she's instantly dead. So that can be scary, but early game buffs, okay, great. Next up is Zed. Yeah, there's a lot more damage to monsters. Of note, Zed's early clear is very, very, very fast after this. There's a really, really good YouTuber that I've been watching a fair bit, Phyllarix, Phyllarix, who's a challenger jungler who puts down a bunch of optimized jungle clears. He's really, really good at jungle clears, to be clear. And yeah, it does a full clear on Zed with no leash with a smite up in under 315, which is really fast. That said, it is a bit unhealthy. And so, we'll see how much of that is actually applicable to the real game. Keep in mind, Zed is not exactly the best ganker. So you'll see what it looks like, but Zed could be interesting. Right now, his solo queue win rate is complete trash for jungle, so would need a very large buff, and obviously, yeah, could be quite a bit here. Zoe getting 4 to 2 seconds off of the cooldown on the E. Basically, we see almost none of her at all. We see her very, very occasionally in pro play, but like 4% presence, something like that. We don't see her much at all. So basically, she's doing a revert of the previous nerf that they did. This should actually be... there should be decimals here. Let's just do that real quick. There you go. We got decimals. Hype. Obviously, you can see it's a pretty meaningful buff to the cooldown. Zoe E, of course, by itself doesn't mean all that much, but obviously you can combo with Q. Yeah, this should be a pretty solid win rate buff. I mean, you could probably go back and look and try to find like what the buff, like how much this nerf meant to her back in the day, but obviously she disappeared pretty much since then. So, okay, small revert, sure, whatever. I'm glad we're back to clean numbers as well. Always happy to see that one. Next up, Ravenous Hydra, Tenic Hydra no longer work on, no longer AoE off the turret, so you can actually split push better. That's going to feel good. Umbral Glaive gets 200 gold cheaper, but gives you 2 fewer lethality points, 2 less lethality, I guess. And basically the way it worked, and this is like my idea of what lethality costs. I don't know if it's what it really should, but like if we, look at, like I'm saying it costs 40 gold. I think Riot considers it like 52, but that they don't really adhere to that. So I'm just calling 40 the number because I think it's close enough to accurate. It actually lines up pretty well with like what AD actually gives you. So it's actually pretty reasonable to consider it 40. It works. It's about the cost of 1 point of AD, which really does line up. In a lot of calculations, it lines up pretty well against AD. So this is, I think, a pretty fair cost per point. Anyway, what it comes down to, I'll talk about this in a previous patch rundown. The vague ballpark goal for legendary items, aka things like Umbral Glaive, is to be 110% gold efficient. Right? Because, I mean, they want to target high rather than low, because if completing an item isn't worth it, you just never buy it. Right? It's literally unpurchasable if you'd rather have just like blasting wands. Like, why buy it if you just buy blasting wands? So items need to be at least 100% gold efficient. And so in this case, Umbral Glaive is 100% gold efficient, and then gives you blackout. Now, but the weird thing is, right, it's giving you blackout for free, but not really, right? There's an opportunity cost. Now, there is a benefit to being a cheap legendary because you're getting a mythic passive a bit sooner, so there is some bonus stats there. But the idea is like, well, okay, if I'm supposed to be 110% gold efficient, this should be 2,860 gold worth of stats, which means, would I pay 255 gold for blackout, for basically an extra sweeper? Yeah, maybe. Would I pay 255 for a sweeper? Yeah. Okay, well then I'm exactly 110% gold efficient if I'm willing to pay 110 for a sweeper, right? Or 210 for 220, 250, whatever for a sweeper. And if I'm not, then maybe I don't buy Umbral Glaive, right? Maybe my sweeper's good enough, and I'd rather just buy something else. And so, okay, we move this way instead. And it's like, okay, well, are you willing to pay like 115 for a free sweeper, an extra sweeper? Yeah, and obviously it has the like you kill wards faster passive, like all that stuff's good and whatever, but like, will I pay 115 for that? Yeah, absolutely. So 200 gold cheaper. Sure, the lethality went down by 2, but again, 200 gold, like lethality is definitely not 100 gold per point. Absolutely not. There's no way it should be priced that much. So this is definitively better. It's also very cheap. Again, you get your mythic passive much sooner. I just like, the very like nice clean numbers. Doesn't really matter to be clear, but it's just nice seeing multiples of 5 in places. As a minor thing. I am also a fan, by the way, of and these items that make sense elsewhere, right? Like in a world where you go Ashe support for whatever reason, or you actually want to buy it because you're going to play Lee Sin jungle and you really want to get rid of wards. I like it, lethality being the suppressed number. Like to me, it makes a lot of sense because that means, like lethality as a stat, by the way, scales multiplicatively with itself. The more lethality you have, the better lethality is. That is just generally true. That is a fact. And so having lethality items that feel a little poachable, right? So things like Serpent's Fang, things like Umbral Glaive are the kinds of items that maybe shouldn't be lethality items, but I'm actually okay with them being 10 lethality items. Because you don't really feel like you're getting punished for buying this. It's not like it's really bad to pay for 10 lethality. But also it's like, oh, I'm an assassin. I want to get rid of vision. Like I'm an assassin. I'm going to make sure that Janna can't shield through the damage, right? Like that makes some degree of sense. It lines up with the sort of idea of the class. And it's like, yeah, you know what? Look, mages get to buy Zhonya's, right? This is a strength of mages. Like their mages get off AP and there's what the tools are, but hey, they get Zhonya's. And it's like, hey, we look at Bruisers. Yeah, Bruisers get to buy GA, right? They get Asterix, they get a Guardian Angel. They get these are their items that are really good for them. And I don't think it's correct that they should be forced to buy them. Like I think Gore Drinker and Asterix are a bit OP. But like, this class has these tools. I think it's interesting because, you come into a game and you're like, oh, wow, they've got like 3 shielding champions. Yeah. We got to really make sure we get someone who can feel good buying Serpent's Fang. Like, I think that's actually interesting. I think that can make you feel smart in champ select. I think it can make champions like assassins who feel very selfish normally have a team like, something they can provide to the team that feels good. But again, to soften it somewhat so that, like, yeah, it doesn't feel that bad for Ashe to buy this. It doesn't feel that bad for Lisa and Jungle to buy this. I like that. I'm a big fan. So there's that change. And then finally, Predator ramps up a bit faster, ramps up to more move speed. Overall, just a stronger rune. Seems pretty good. Void Clash, match history stuff. Oh yeah, web match history is has gone away. Basically, no one used it. Bunch of bug fixes that probably don't matter. Remastered Quinn, great. Voice lines, no Ornn passive during Viego. Oh, good. Akshan no longer gets card screwed by silence. He can now hop off. That's good. Great. Yes, that was very silly. Oh, he ignores all CC from Dragon Earth Herald after he gets his passive off once. I want to note there's one thing with Dr. Mundo, where if you Trundle Pillar him to try to knock him back, he can walk through your pillar. Trundle is not a good Mundo counterpick because he really goes where he pleases. You put up the train and he's like, nah, and just trucks right through. It's so useless. As somebody who's played Jungle Trundle into Dr. Moon the top, it's dumb. I don't know if it also fixes this by happenstance, but yeah, it that's a fun interaction. Oh, I didn't realize this. This is gonna feel really good that the Q didn't apply lifesteal during E. Yeah, that's meaningful. Okay, you can no longer cancel hook shot using consumables. Okay. Apparently he was using his passive shield against while he's dodging. Basically adding an extra bit of thing where Sona Q just giving them the buff will count for tiers. This is actually something, this is kind of interesting. So the way tier works, right, is tier stacks when you cast an ability that affects something, right? It affects a champion, affects a minion. And for a while, like a spell that was flagged like grant buff, so things like Sona Q, right? It's not shielding, it's not healing, it's just giving them like some kind of buff. That was flagged as like doesn't count with tier. And now it does, basically. I believe like that kind of stuff like doesn't trigger Aerie, for example. I could be wrong about that, but I believe Sona Q doesn't give Aerie to a teammate. But like Sona W does, because it's reasonable for like these lines to be slightly drawn differently. Think about things like Jarvan Flag, right? Jarvan's Flag, the E, like it gives a buff to teammates, but it doesn't shield them or heal them. Like you should probably interact with some abilities differently than other abilities, right? So, it makes sense that there are some lines drawn. Anyway, now it's like, well, no, give buff should count for tier. So, it stacks that. Cool. W includes slow percentage, great. The culling doesn't deal bonus damage to monsters. Includes shield for jungle monster damage. And okay. So, this was a very long one, full of lots of rambles. TLDR patch 11.18. Yes, this is one of 2 worlds-focused patches here. There are a lot of changes that are primarily focused at the World Championship. Some champions are being buffed and nerfed that don't need it for solo queue, but it's because of Pro. 2 AD off of Aphelios. 4 seconds of the early cooldown of increased on the cooldown of Ashe W early on. Camille getting 4 and 2 seconds, there we go, on her early and mid-game passive cooldown. Draven's ult now executes. It now executes based on his adoration stacks. This could be really, really good. It's kind of hard to say because it does not deal any damage until it would deal lethal damage. And then even then, they might have died anyway. The one thing that does help to do is if they are in that threshold between wouldn't have died and, in adoration, it guarantees you get the last hit. It does a bunch of true damage. That's all valuable. It's all useful. But like, hey, by the way, that's all relevant. Dr. Mundo, generally speaking, buffed here. Not only does his ult, instead of healing, grant missing health as bonus health, which means it bypasses Grievous wounds, but it also feeds into the rest of his kit. It makes his other abilities do more damage because they're based off, max health or bonus health. And it also makes this heal actually more because the total amount of health you have gained makes up for this change and makes it heal overall more. So big buff to Dr. Mundo. He should be a very good top laner. Fizz is getting maybe like 10-ish armor worth of pre-mitigation damage reduction against auto attacks. So pretty meaningful there. 10 flat damage on Season's Strident's auto attacks for the longer duration fights. And then the R damage is down by 0 to 50, 25 to 75, and 50 to 100. based on how far his ult goes. This ultimately means a mini shark is less punishing than before. The amount of damage you lose here is only about 1/3, as opposed to losing more like 1/4. Or sorry, only losing about 1/4. Wait, sorry, losing about 25 to 30%, as opposed to losing like 35%. I got that one backwards a little bit. So the amount of damage lost by only getting a small shark is less. You are less punished. So the need to land a big shark is smaller overall in terms of damage difference. So that has an effect there, right? Obvious buff, definite nerf, but very light nerf on small shark. And not even a nerf at rank 1, right? Same damage. And, only 25 for medium shark at rank 1, so, not that big. Gangplank gets a really, really massive health increase. This more than makes up for the health lost through the grasp nerfs. Now, it does not make up for the damage lost from the grasp nerfs or the sustain loss from the grasp nerfs, but if you come into like a mid-game team fight and you compare old grasp to new grasp, because it's a range grasp now, you absolutely have more health now. Now, that said, Gangplank's probably going to be running things like Fleet Footwork in the real world, but makes up for that pretty well. So, reasonable durability, cool beans. Next up is Jace. This basically means nothing. I'm going to skip it. Jinx, a little bit better mana cost early game on Q. Okay, great. Kai'Sa gets a little bit better late game on her E. The rank up is, eventually 2 seconds shorter. This also gets reduced per auto attack. So, 12 becoming 10 is more like maybe 6 becoming 4 or, 7 becoming 5, which is, percentage-wise a much bigger buff. So quite a bit to late game Kai'Sa. Kalista. 0.5, 0.25 off the knockup duration on Fate's Call. Pretty big early to mid-game nerf on Kallista's CC. Karma gets 2 armor and 10 flat shielding, as far as I can tell. Max Q is correct on support Karma now. And she is not in a horrible spot. But Riot's doing some early game focused buffs. Right, base armor is slightly early game focused. Obviously 10 flat shield is definitely early game focused. Overall stronger champion. Okay, great. Maybe we'll see her in pro. Kog'Maw now has a real AP ratio on E. It is now real mage AP ratio. Very big buff. This AP ratio goes from absolute garbage to actually usable and is a pretty good change. AP Cog should be good next patch. Lisa loses 2 AD. Should be fine still. Lilia loses a ton of health regen in the early game. This is a full third of her early game health regen gone from top lane Lilia. Overall, though, it is more regen across the jungle clear for jungle Lilia. This does change somewhat for team fights. Once you're out and just like battling the Lee Sin or whatever, and you're only hitting him, well, okay, yeah, you just have less base health regen, so you're SOL. But this should help. This should really affect top lane Lilia quite a ton. Again, her jungle clear should be, I'm going to say about 100 health healthier over the course of the entire clear. That should be pretty meaningful. And then we have Blooming Blows. The buff duration for the boost speed lasts longer. Supposed to cooldown is a bit shorter here as well. These are both kind of nice. Ultimately, jungle Lily should be in a pretty good spot. Should be quite strong. And top Lily should be nerfed a little bit, but obviously this nerf is getting compensated for by these buffs, so we'll see where it goes. Misfortune does about, well, 1/6, 1/7, and 1/8 more damage on bullet time. It's pretty good. Morgana gets 2 seconds off the ult cooldown. Or sorry, the E cooldown, the shield cooldown. Not bad. Kiana gets probably deleted from mid lane in this patch. Her base attack goes up, which will help her jungle clear. Okay, great. Her base health regen goes down pretty meaningfully. It goes from high to normal champion, basically. But her EQ no longer tracks champions, and the E no longer does 10. It does 10 less damage. So if you dash or you turn invisible, your EQ will now miss, most likely. That's a really big deal. E does 10 less damage. That matters. But hey, the Q does 25% more damage to jungle monsters, and this could do a lot for her jungle clear, and she may end up being just a good jungler, a bad mid laner, and we'll see where it goes. Renekton, still a pro problem. I think there is room to do base stat skews, kind of like we had with Silas. His stats actually are pretty early game focused, and I actually would have liked to see a designer at some point of the last 12 changes to Renekton just do a base stat shift. And push him away from early game toward late game. There's actually a lot of room there. And I think that would actually do quite a bit to help that. But either way, empowered stun down from 0.5 to 1 second. This is going to do a lot for the, standard level 3 pathing top, tower diving. Your opponent can't fight back. It's going to be harder to land the Talia combos, all that stuff. Yeah, this is going to matter. Next up is Rumble. Rumble's going to be back in the jungle at least a little bit. They're reverting the scrap shield nerf and instead having the attack speed on the passive scale. The math is pretty easy here. It's 30% lower at level 1, 30% higher at level 18. The break even is across level 9 to level 10. Um, and yeah, ultimately, if people really want to play Rumble Jungle, I think they should be able to. That said, the AD mid meta is basically gone. We're pretty much exclusively mid mages, and Riot aren't nerfing into the mid mages. Um, like Lucian got pushed out of mid, obviously in the previous patch, but we're just seeing Syndra, Orianna all the time now, Silas, whatnot, a fair bit. Like we're I think like 6 or 7 of the top 8 mid laners in pro are AP mids, so I think the need for Rumble goes down a lot when you're not seeing Viego, Lee Sin, mid anymore. Trish probably still playable though. Singed now has Grievous Wounds during Insanity Potion. That should be pretty good. Soraka clears Grievous Wounds when she ults. Also pretty good. Talia, mid, gets a big buff here. If you're a good Talia jungle, you don't get this. This doesn't matter for you almost at all. Obviously, there can be team fights where like you have to be on worked ground, then you cast it, and okay, whatever. Like there's a non-zero buff to jungle Talia, but not for a jungle clear. Mid Talia is going to gain a lot here. Now the worked ground rate is going down and the worked ground duration going down obviously matters a lot. So Talia has like really good access to available full cast of Q. But the big thing to me is the fact that casting a threaded volley on worked ground, where you only get 1 stone and it costs 1 mana, refunds half the cooldown, is a really big deal. Because this actually allows Talia to reliably use worked ground to use Q to last hit. Because before the cooldown was so long, you're like, yeah, it's cheap and I can just do it. But you kind of got screwed on the fact that the cooldown still really hurts you until you were like level 9. And that was already pretty late in the game. And at level 9, you could just usually with your mythic, just like WE the wave and get most of it anyway, and then use a regular Q to clear the rest of it out. So you didn't really get anything out of that. So now it's like, oh, I can actively use single target Q or single cast Q, and that's going to get a lot. So this could do a ton for Talia. I'm going to like just throw out a number and say it's a 2% win rate bump, but I have no idea if that's accurate. But I think this is actually a really big deal. Talon loses 20 damage off max rank of Q, which you max second, so that's at level 13. Rake does more damage to monsters, though, so we'll see Talon Jungle get slightly better. We'll see if he's playable. Thresh loses 5 move speed and some damage on Flay. The TLDR here is at about 26 souls, your Flay does more damage. There you go. There's the math. Trundle. Trundle Jungle maxes this last. Trundle Support maxes it first. Rank 1 of the ability, your opponents run about 3% faster. Max rank of the ability, they run about 35% faster. It's a pretty big deal. That does a lot to nerf Pillar Max Trundle. Twitch gets 10 flat AD extra on his R. Seems good. Urgot gets basically 2 flat seconds off the cooldown. You max Q last, so this buff doesn't change to this until level 14. So you just get 10 mana and 2 seconds off the cooldown for the majority of the game. Big buff to Urgot, should feel good. And keep in mind, Urgot Q has a total AD ratio, so this ability matters a lot more later on in the game as well, which is pretty nice. So yeah, there's that. Varus loses 2 AD and 10% early attack speed. Pretty meaningful for his overall DPS. Definitely going to affect his early laning phase a fair bit, but won't affect his late game very much at all, since 2 AD doesn't matter that much late game, and you get the attack speed back at level 13. Yone gets more shielding. Yumi gets a quite shorter cooldown for basically the entire game. Keep in mind that level 18 Yumis don't really exist, so always shorter cooldown on the passive. Yumi is a late game skewed champion, so fair enough. Zed now has a very fast jungle clear, one of the fastest in League of Legends. I think it's like top 5. I could be wrong about that one, but it's really fast. It's not terribly healthy. He has no CC, really. He's probably not a great ganker, but hey, Jungle Zed is a possibility. Keep in mind that Zed's abilities are all bonus AD ratios, and ranks in W don't matter. So Zed doesn't really need to level past 13. So there's a chance that Zed can work in the jungle and just play a very roam-heavy style and, clear camps, then go in. Like, Zed's the kind of champion that I think would fit my jungle play style. I just don't know if I'm good enough at Zed, but this is a champion I'm, interested to play. Because I think he could be really interesting. So we get to revert on her E cooldown nerf from 2 years ago. 4 seconds to 2 seconds off, pretty meaningful. Should do quite a bit. Ravenous Hydra, Anti-Tank Hydra, no longer splash on turrets, so you can actually siege without killing yourself by pulling aggro. Yay! Umbral Glaive gets basically 200 gold cheaper while losing 80 gold worth of stats. To me, that's a totally fair trade. Obviously, you're getting more than twice back what you're losing. And makes the item quite good. I think it's really playable. I still want to point out that as far as I can tell, Kraken Slayer Senna is not the Senna build, at least for support Senna. Lethality and Divine Thunder both seem to be much stronger builds of the champion. You should go for those instead. They are better. You should do them. They are good. Play those builds. And yeah, Umbral Glaive, definitely a good item. Predator also stacks up faster and moves faster. That's great. I want to point out that a Predator buff is an Omnistone buff. I know no one plays Omnistone, but Omnistone specifically gives you Predator when you're out of combat and far from enemy champions. There's a chance that you can just do an Omnistone jungle build and get newly buff Predator, and it's good. I'm just saying, you should really try Omnistone junglers more often. It might be great. Just saying. Just saying. Just saying. All right, that's it for the patch rundown. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you all very much. This was a really, really big one because there were a lot of changes, and I went in the long version. I went on a couple different rants that didn't need to go on, but whatever. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.